Superintendent Roberson, is race a red herring? Is that how you see the issue of the diversity of AIM programs in general and the diversity of the AIM program in Davis? Is it a red herring issue? Should we be caring about this issue? How should we be caring about this issue?
I think we should look at it in respect to naming any program a gifted program. I think families and people will take offense if their children are not considered giftedness. I think that's part of the reason that the former board modified the name. If it's not a gifted program, then people may not take offense to their children not being called that. So that in that regard, I think race will always become an issue, and it could be used. Is it a concern?
Well, what about with these numbers? So on chart 4, people in the audience mentioned this, but I hadn't heard the numbers actually presented in the presentation. But on chart 4, in years past, we've identified 8 black students for the program, 7 black students, 10 black students, but this year only 1. And next year, if we stick with the 98th percentile cutoff, there would be 0 identified at the 98th percentile this year. And then the very stark numbers on Latinos as well. In the past, we've identified 31 in one year Latino students, 20 Latino students in another year, 6 and 4 in other years, but this year only 4, and it would go down to 3 under the 98th percentile criteria. Are these results that we are happy with? Are we pleased with these results? Are they acceptable legally? I mean, Stephanie, you mentioned that in Elk Grove, is it? There's a civil rights, there was a threat of civil rights action when the AIM or GATE program there wasn't reflecting the diversity of the constituents. So I'm asking, do we need to be worried about the diversity from a values point of view in terms of Davis, but also from a legal point of view? And finally, from the point of view of just, do we think that the tests are accurate? Are we using the wrong tests? If they're not identifying the true potential in every one of our communities, that to me makes me question the test, because I know there is intellectual gifted potential in every one of our communities, and if our tests aren't getting us there, then I think that it undermines my confidence in the tests. So can you tell us about why to care about diversity with respect to our values, our legal obligations at the state and federal level, and then also with respect to just our obligation to properly identify gifted potential in every community in our district?
Yes, we're always concerned about diversity, and I do need to couch that. And this staff right here took a look at the numbers, and we know that our original objective was to properly identify students. When we look at these numbers, they change each year. Just the numbers themselves change in the number of students in each particular class. So it's very difficult for us. I mean, if we had the same number of white students, Asian students, Latino students, and African American students each year in the 3rd grade, and those numbers shifted, it might tell us something. Then still there are variables with each student, because students come to us each year, a different group of students. We aren't looking at the same students each year. We've seen drop in the number of white students that have been identified, the numbers, and so we've seen drops in most student groups in the demographics.
A huge drop in the number of white students that were identified, which again makes me, when the numbers are so disproportionate to our population, it makes me question whether the tests are working. I mean, honestly, the purpose of this was to increase our confidence in the process, but when the numbers look like this, I question whether the tests are the right set of tests.
Agreed, and that was what even brought us to this. We know that we had an over-identification of students through the TONY, and that was brought out. Our current test right now, you're talking to an educator who believes that there are inherent biases in all exams, and that is the reason we wanted to bring before the board at least a cocktail of assessments and bring in a team together that would look at students and try to match them up with the appropriate exam. Again, I've mentioned before that this is not a hard science, it is a social science. We're relying on people, professionals, and their expert opinion, and I trust them to do their jobs. We are going back to take a look at the group of students that were mentioned that we believe probably would have been better served issuing those students to Tony, so we're making adjustments there.
And I am thrilled that you guys are doing that. Thank you for sitting back and assessing based on these results and continuing to see where we may have misjudged the proper test. This is our first time through. I think the goal to get that proper set of tests, and that recognizes that every child learns differently, comes with a different kind of background to the table, and that's why we have a diversity of tests. And I see you are all sincerely, and I saw that assessment team working so hard to find the right test for the right student. I commend that. Do you feel that we need to take our time now to assess this new process? And Alan, I disagree with you. There's a lot more different here than just eliminating private tests. We never used the Naglieri before. We never used the Hope Scale before. We are determining who gets what test in a very different way than we did in the past. We changed a lot with respect to our process for identification, and I am with my colleagues in trying to hope for a better process, but I think that includes assessing this, taking the time we need to do that. So my question for you is, do you feel that you need some time to assess that before we go to immediately implement a 98% percentile cutoff for the following year?
I think that is a question really that the board will need to determine. What we did do is we showed the board the numbers. If all things remain the same, what a 98 might look like. But I think that is really a question for the board to determine. One of the things that I had a chance to communicate with staff about is program design. We've heard Trustee Levenberg bring up the idea of a possible combination of multi-age. Yes, there are other options to where we can serve students perhaps across a variety of sites. As far as the 98, I know that is what the board agreed upon. That was our recommendation, trying to get to that number of students that we believed might be best served. As far as slowing down, that would be the board's decision. We want to make sure that the board has all the data, all the facts to be able to make an intelligent decision about that, and that's why we shared all information in this presentation.
So you want us to decide that one, okay? Fair enough. I guess the other question, another set of questions really is with respect to the numbers. So if 82 are identified this year, that's almost half of the total identified last year. And as Trustee Archer mentioned earlier, there's always a number of students who are identified but choose not to leave their home school. Many students who are identified are often at Chavez. They choose in large numbers not to leave their school. So a couple of trustees had said that a great benefit of this is that we don't need a lottery. But I'm not convinced that we don't need a lottery. What if 65 students decide that they want to do this program and we only have seats for 58 in